A warm welcome to all the speakers and participants. I am Dr. Subhash Hira, moderator of webinar learning series that is launched by the Global COVID-19 Network. As COVID scientists and warriors are drowning in tons of information of varying quality through publications and the social media, scientific webinars are becoming a credible source of reliable information for everybody. Sambodhi Research and Communication Organization, Indian Social Responsibility Network of New Delhi, and the University of Washington, Seattle have co-sponsored this global network to foster South-South collaboration and partnerships to share lessons of COVID. Today's webinar, sixth in the series, is titled Social and Economic Impact of COVID-19. The slide shows different levels of lockdown restrictions in different countries, namely the blue, pink, or red halos around these circles with the flags of these countries. Please see quadrant 1, where Vietnam and other countries show blue halo, meaning limited restrictions on the lockdown. In quadrant 2, India is also seen with blue halo, South Africa with pink halo, that is moderate restrictions, and Argentina with red halo, that is severe restrictions. The quadrants are made up by vertical axis representing economic outcomes using GDP and industrial agricultural production indicators, and the horizontal axis in the slide shows public health outcomes using number of cases detected, the COVID fatality rate, and social outcomes. So the slide is a pictorial representation of socio-economic outcomes of COVID-19 in countries of the world. Quadrant 1, as you see on the upper left of the slide, is high economic and better public health outcomes. That is China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. All of them used low to moderate restrictions for lockdown. Quadrant 2, marked in lower left of the slide, is for countries that have low economic but high public health outcomes, including social outcomes. These countries like India, South Africa, Iran, of course, had red halo, Germany, Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. All these countries with varying range from low to high restrictions used for lockdowns. Quadrant 3 in the lower right of the slide shows low economic and low public health outcomes. Those are the both indicators being worse, and all big economies like the United States, UK, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, these all countries that have used moderate to high restrictions are all pushed into that corner in the slide. As I said just now, quadrant 3 is the lower right in the slide, and it is the worst quadrant to be in for big economies like United States, UK, Brazil, etc., who have used moderate to high restrictions. The quadrant 4 on the upper right is high economic but still with worse public health outcomes, and that is the cluster of EU countries. Most EU countries used moderate restrictions, hence have a pink halo. EU countries that have had high economic outcomes but worse public health outcomes, such as the high number of infections and deaths. Moderate restrictions in EU is indicated with the pink halo. Thus, quadrant 1 countries got the best socioeconomic outcomes, and quadrant 3 countries got the worst socioeconomic outcomes. With that introduction, we move on to our first speaker, that is Dr. Swati Maheshwari, Senior Internal Medicine Specialist in Delhi and Gurugram, and a popular TV host on social issues, including COVID-19.
First of all, like to thank Dr. Subhas Hira sir for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present my thoughts on this wonderful platform. And the great initiative that you have taken up during these times. I know we are still in the middle of the pandemic and still fighting it at such a large scale across the world. But I think what we are seeing right now is just tip of the iceberg, because we are more or less right now just more occupied with fighting with the virus and the pandemic that is there. But I think a bigger tsunami is there to hit us once all this settles up, because that's what we see when we look at the social impacts of COVID. And I think some way or the other, we need to start preparing for it now, because this is an eventuality that will strike us. This is not something that we can, or somehow we would wish to, though definitely to not see all this happening around. But then, yes, this is something that's going to strike us very hard, looking at the social impacts and all. So, very good evening to all the listeners and everyone who are there, and to my co panelists as well. A very good evening to all of you. And so, I think I'll just start with the presentation. So we all know that COVID is a human, economic, and a social crisis, and none of the people from any race, religion, any background, ethnic background, nationality, everybody has been impacted by it, and we not necessarily have to be infected to actually to get impacted by it. So everyone across the world has been impacted by this in a very, very large way, and more would be impacted in times to come. We've been talking about these SDGs from quite a while now, and we all know that these are the global goals which were adopted by the UN member states, and we have that was in 2015, and we all know it was a universal call to end poverty and to protect the planet, and to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity, and at least by 2030. But we all know that now all these SDGs have got a very kind of a bad blow, because out of these 17, 10 of these SDGs are the ones which have been directly impacted by this pandemic. And we know there'll be a collateral damage to the rest of the SDGs that are there. And so at present, all these SDGs, they appear even more ambitious than what they looked when we started with them. So obviously now we would have to all gear up to different kind of challenges that we are going to face up in the coming time. If you look at the so not just the immediate effects that health and income and jobs is going to bring about, the pandemic has brought in a fear of, I would say, a lot of uncertainty, the fear of unseen, and therefore there's an increase in people's anxiety and worry, and it is affecting their social relationships. So you could see frustration, depression, helplessness setting in into people, and their trust is getting affected as well, especially with the government and the employers, and their personal security and sense of belonging has been really impacted. So if we look at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, then nearly 12% of the households, they live in crowded conditions, and this adds to the psychological strain of confinement and social distancing measures. So especially if you look at the OECD, it has roughly around 37 member states, and so it roughly covers up quite a large population of the world, and we could say that it represents quite uniformly as to what we are trying to say over here. So looking at that also, I would say the access to the basic and the exclusive sanitation is still a challenge, and is an important for limiting the spread of the virus between households. Because if you look at this, then an exclusive indoor toilet facility for one family is still a far-fetched dream for many. So when people are living in crowded places and they share the toilets and they share such facilities, then the chances of spread of the infection, they increase manyfold. Also, if we look at then across the 28 OECD countries, 36% of the people are financially insecure, meaning that they lack financial assets to keep their family above the poverty line for more than 3 months. And this is what is more important here, should their income suddenly stop. So these are people who were not below poverty line. They were very well earning and all and everything prior to COVID. So if you could say then their income was above half of median in their country. country. But now, since their income has suddenly stopped, they are slipping away below the poverty line, and for them it has become a huge challenge. And these are people generally like single parent or large families or low wage workers, or they could even be less educated, or people in precarious jobs. So these kind of people are the ones who were living at the edge, but now, since because of the COVID, they would be pushed beyond this, and they actually are a very, very vulnerable population right now.
One thing that has struck me is we are in midst of varying degrees of pessimism, and it would require some degree of effort on our part to be optimistic about what the future holds for us. It is important to look at the economic setting. So some numbers I will place, and then I will discuss what it means for the people. The dominant income source in rural India is manual casual labor, with 50% of the households dependent on it. Cultivation as an income source, only 30% have reported in the socio-economic caste census as important. Agriculture, if we take that as an important economic activity, 60% is almost 60% is rain-fed. That is uncertain, risky, with gross outputs in the range of about 60,000 odd per hectare and 91% marginal land holding. And in some states, actually, like Bihar, you would have 0.75 hectare as mean. You can do the math to know what kind of agriculture income we'll have. If given a choice, so no wonder, there was in 2018, CSDS had done a study, and there they found about 61% of the farm families reported they would prefer to be employed in cities. 76% of the farmers would prefer to do something other than farming. Now, when we keep hearing in the last few days more so, and I've been part of a few webinars where NREGS has been talked about. Let's look at the numbers there. 10 crore job card holders, they have barely got 37 days of guaranteed work from the 100 days promised to them. And that has covered roughly 5.5 crore. That's about 55 million households. This is the economic distress that we had the migrants exoding from, largely as a casual, informal wage workers in our cities. I mean, in the sense that shahar mein koi bhuka nahi marta. The other impulse has been, just look at the median age in rural areas. Today it is less than 27, and with about 87 odd percent having some kind of a schooling. They are children of the information, entertainment, and communication age, where middle class lives are beamed. Now with Jio, it is beamed right in your palm, and affordable handset through affordable handset. The camera of jobs, urban life, amenity is a second pull for the young and upwardly mobile rural youth. On the social side, Dr. Swati has talked at length. I will speak of other dimension, the violence due to caste transgressions in accessing social and public spaces. Lynching, we have heard in the last 2 years, both of Muslims and Dalits. Gender violence, and it's no one's argument that you don't have caste discrimination in urban India, but the extent of violence, the subtle and not so subtle undermining of one's identity and self-worth is another reason for escape. Rural India, in recent times, we talk of it in ways which the narrative was built in our formative years as an independent country. Post India, we had seen our three tall leaders, Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, having a different outlook to village. While Gandhi looked at it as villages as sites of growth, authenticity. For Nehru, villages were dung heaps, were images of backwardness. And for Ambedkar, the village was site of oppression. These three impulses actually define the rural as we know today. We are a large country, and given the size, what is true, all these are true actually. And all these would not also be true. For example, the tribal villages where I have spent most of my life, the forest dwellers keeping the human ecology balance intact. There is a way for community living, they have been demonstrating for long. And I'd like to highlight today's villages are very different.
Thank you, Dr. Subhash Hira. Thank you, Santosh ji, for introducing me to this platform. And thank you, Sambodhi, for organizing this. Let me first, give you an overview of what REC has been doing in CSR. REC Limited is a non-banking finance corporation. It lends to private sector, power sector, and as per the government CSR Act, 2% of the net profit has to be spent on CSR. So we have they have established the REC Foundation, which is the implementing arm of CSR implementing arm of REC Limited. So if we look at last 5 to 6 years when it has been made mandatory, we have contributed to building toilets primarily in the schools. This has reduced open defecation, and then we funded hundreds of solar rooftop primarily to support environmental sustainability, but it also helped in market uptake. Then we have been supporting aspirational districts, particularly in health, nutrition, and school education. 7 districts have been kind of picked up by us. These are all really remote districts. As far as Kifre in Nagaland, which is geographically the remote most, as well as in terms of the delta index. And then another bucket of funding that we have done is in the disability. A lot of aid and appliances, leprosy centers, etc. And skilling and reskilling is another area that we have been funding. You would see in the table the amount of the sanctions and the expenditure that we have made. And yet another is the the COVID support. So let me just come to the COVID pandemic and something about the migrant workers. I think my previous speaker spoke about it at length, but still to give a backdrop to particularly the skilling, let me just narrate it. Lockdown 1, 2, 3, we did not have much of issue. Migrant workers managed to stay put, and one of the major issue was the ration and meals. I think that was government was able to provide, but then whatever I have gathered, it's not and also based on whatever I have read, but the rent, monthly bills on electricity, water, medicine, school fees, and more than all this, it's uncertainty, which made them start going back to their homes. That is during the lockdown 4. When this actually started off, people started going by foot, cycles, tricycles, auto rickshaw. Then government machinery got into action. Shramik special trains were run. Government organized buses were run. And let me come to what kind of migration is happening. We Anish also told us just a while ago, we have almost 140 million migrant workers in India, and these primarily come from 4 states: Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh. Where do they go? They go to Mumbai, Delhi, which are the major destinations. Where do they work? They work mostly in manufacturing and construction, and most often they are pretty vulnerable. They don't have inadequate healthcare, nutrition, housing, and sanitation. That's what we are seeing now. They are the first ones to kind of return back to their hometowns. They unfortunately don't get PDS also. So whatever was supplied to them through the government machinery, that they were receiving, but in other words, routine PDS, because the ration card is elsewhere in their hometown and the same thing is not running here. So government actually tried to address over the, especially the lockdown 4 period. That's one good thing that has started. One nation, one ration card, that they did start. So yeah, that's what I'm coming to. This slide really narrates what was the government response. They also increased the allocation to NREGA, and they increased the daily wage. And there is now almost 10 million migrant workers have reached back the district headquarters. Is the kind of number as of 30th May. This is increasing, and something like 3 million to UP, 2.5 million to Bihar. And if you see, I was trying to read up and try to accumulate what is happening, and then particularly coming to skilling also. So quarantines are being done at district headquarters. There are lots of questions on it, how good they are, everything is there. My previous speaker spoke about it. Before they reach their villages, that's what they're planning to do. Government is trying to, from UP, I was gathering what is being planned, what is being done. They are planning to give affordable houses, shops pay for their GSTs, provide electricity, water, and other amenities. One they have started is a government portal. Apparently, about 1.5 million people have registered. According to that, 150,000 people were working in real estate, 30,000 in furniture technicians, home decorators, drivers, electricians, home appliances, etc. The government is also trying to do migrant commission and trying to help the laborers engage. They're trying to engage the industry association into it. And some districts, especially in UP, one district, one product, branding, marketing is also being thought out. All these are in process. Now, where does the money come from? I was reading up, 1% cess is collected on the construction, whichever is higher than 10 lakh rupees construction, they collect 1%. So typically it has already accumulated about 52,000 crores, and 75% of that remains unused. But not necessarily where there is money, there are migrant workers. So if you see UP and Bihar are the large migrant population, my guess is, I don't have those state-wise details, but my guess is the cess collected there may be lower. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. Once again, on behalf of REC Foundation as well as REC Limited.